Well, hey everybody, this is Robert and welcome to Outbreak News TV. Now this week, Arizona Governor Doug Ducey signed a proclamation declaring that this week in Arizona is Valley Fever Awareness Week. And this is what the proclamation says. In part, valley fever infections in Arizona have greatly increased over the last decade. And in most years, 65% of all nationally reported cases of valley fever occurring in Arizona. Valley fever is one of the most commonly reported infectious diseases in Arizona, whereas enhanced surveillance of valley fever cases demonstrates the serious impact valley fever has on the health of our citizens and on Arizona's healthcare system. So, in a nutshell, Arizona, the state with the most valley fever cases in the United States, followed by California, but about 65%, and that is an accurate number. And we'll take a look at some numbers in a little bit. But yeah, so this is Valley Fever Awareness Week in the state of Arizona. So what is valley fever? Also known as coccidioidomycosis. It's an infection caused by a fungus called coccidioides. Typically, the most common species is Coccidioides immitis. And this fungus lives in the soil, predominantly in the southwestern United States, parts of Mexico, Central and South America. It has been found in more northern states like in Washington. People get valley fever by breathing in the microscopic fungal spores from the air. Although most people who do breathe in the spores don't get sick, but those that do can have some very serious infection. And there are some certain groups that are at higher risk of becoming severely ill. So that's a Reader's Digest snapshot of what valley fever is. So some of the numbers, and this is the latest from the CDC, in 2019 through November 2nd. And so far in 2019, seen about 15,000 valley fever cases cumulative across the country. However, if you look at the numbers a little bit more closely, you can see that two states account for 98% of the cases. And Arizona, of course, is number one with 8,466 cases. And that compares to 6,400 cases seen this time last year. So Arizona's seen an increase in cases in 2019. And as usual, California is second with a little over 6,000 cases. So those are the latest numbers. Then you see a smattering of cases in some other states across the U.S. In this synopsis by CIDRAP about an emerging infectious diseases report earlier this year, it talks about the delayed valley fever diagnosis is linked to really excessive cost and antibiotic use. And it says a review of patients with coccidioidomycosis or valley fever has found that nearly 90% had a delay in diagnosis. And such delays were associated with excess cost and extensive antibacterial use, according to University of Arizona researchers. The retrospective review looked at the medical charts of 815 patients in Tucson, an endemic area, who sought care from January 2015 through September 2017. After excluding patients who had prior coccidioidomycosis, mistaken codon, and unconfirmed diagnoses, the researchers identified 276 patients with coccidioidomycosis. Of those, 30 received a diagnosis at presentation, and 246, or about 9 out of 10 of them, had a delay of more than a day. And 43% had a delay of more than a month. And they say that the delayed diagnosis was associated with, close to $600,000 in this fungal disease-related cost. And over 1,100 antibiotic orders were submitted before the diagnosis of the fungal disease. And unfortunately, vancomycin and daptomycin constituted more than a fifth of all the antibiotics that were ordered. So, so diagnosis is a problem with valley fever. And this really piggybacks on that, or the other one piggybacks on this. This is actually from 2016, and the IDSA issued some new guidelines on valley fever diagnosis. And I just want to point out a few things that was said. It's an equal opportunity bug, and everyone who is exposed has the same chance of getting infected, said John Gagliana, MD, lead author of the guidelines. He's a professor at the University of Arizona College of Medicine and the director of the Valley Fever Center for Excellence in Tucson. Quote, in many patients, it's more debilitating than mononucleosis. These patients feel horrible, they can't get out of bed or go to work, and often they are sick for weeks or months. Many worry they have cancer or other diseases, so getting correctly diagnosed puts a name to the illness and dispels that fear. The updated guidelines, written by a multidisciplinary committee led by infectious disease specialists, are now much more geared toward primary care clinicians who are typically the first to see and treat patients with pneumonia. They may overlook valley fever as a potential cause of the illness and prescribe unnecessary tests and therapy like antibiotics. Gagliana says valley fever is underdiagnosed in part because past guidelines were directed to this specialist, whereas most of these patients initially see their primary care physicians, many of whom aren't aware of how common this infection is. He goes on to say, about a third of cases of pneumonia in Arizona are caused by valley fever. Doctors need to ask patients with pneumonia about their travel history and if they've recently traveled to endemic areas and need to consider valley fever. Now, in this Arizona report from the Arizona PBS, it talks about some other issues that are of concern with valley fever, and this concern is climate change. And this report goes on to say California and Arizona make up more than 95% of all U.S. cases of valley fever, an infection caused by a fungus that lives in soil in the Southwest, largely because they share arid climates and have an abundance of outdoor workers. New research finds that as climate change alters American landscapes in the coming decades, valley fever has the potential to spread far beyond the Southwest. Researchers at the University of California, Irvine, predict the range of what's colloquially known as San Joaquin Valley fever will more than double over the next 75 years, spreading to the Midwest and Canada. Quote, this disease, as we know right now, is not currently found in Canada, but by the end of the 21st century, it may even extend into a whole new country, said Morgan Goris, lead author of the study and recent UC Irvine PhD graduate in Earth System Science. So just another thing, another little concern to look at when we're dealing with this fungal infection. And lastly, I want to talk about the hidden victims of valley fever, and that's dogs. And in this report, in the record, it says, animals too can contract the respiratory disease, valley fever, but the problem remains largely unstudied in Bakersfield. And they're talking about Kern County, California, despite the region's status as one of the hottest valley fever regions in the country. Quote, there is no good information out there about how many animals get valley fever, said Lisa Schubetz, a research scientist at the Valley Fever Center for Excellence at the University of Arizona. It's not reported. Schubitz and the Tucson University conducted one of the only studies ever done on valley fever in animals. The university found that from 6% to 10% of dogs in the three most populous counties of Arizona become sick with valley fever each year. That's a lot of dogs, she said, and that's a lot of money. The study estimated that Arizonans spend $60 million a year caring for dogs with valley fever. So yeah, this is a really big problem in the Southwest. Certain areas of California, Arizona is definitely a big problem. And so this week in 2019, we are looking at Valley Fever Awareness Week in the state of Arizona, signed by the governor of the state, Doug Ducey. So if you didn't know much about valley fever, I hope this helps a little bit. There's a lot of stuff to learn about it. You can learn more at the University of Arizona's Valley Fever Center for Excellence. They have some great information there. Okay, if you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, comment below, share it with your friends, please, and I'll see you next time.